Hi, a very good day to you, and I hope that you are taking enough precautions in light of COVID, not going out unless necessary, wearing a mask, and practicing physical distancing. Now, this is a very important topic, and I gave a live talk on the invite of McGraw Hill, which was attended by over 4,000 people. But I got a lot of requests where people asked for presentation. And also, the people who watched it after the live show, somehow due to settings, could not see the slides. So I decided to re-record it for your convenience and understanding. And hopefully with this, it may also reach a broader audience. It's a very trying time for the whole world. For the first time in documented history, we have been under a lockdown, and a very organized one. We aren't sure when we are going to be back to normal and what are going to be the new norms. Well, the topic of future of education and how to prepare for the future of work is a challenging one, no doubt. The only solace I have is that last year I wrote this book, Your Degree is Not Enough, Education for Gen Next. This book was about what's the future of education? What do students of today, professionals of today, parents do to make sure that the kids or the professionals are future ready? The future is not going to be the same. And more importantly, post-COVID, it is all the more relevant. When I authored this book, it was last year. Never did I realize that this book is going to be so relevant in short time due to COVID. So let me start. My book deals with the importance or the lack of importance of a degree. See, our education system is overly focused on degrees, but degrees in itself are not enough. Once you have degree and you have experience, that makes it education. When you have experience which is for a longer time, when it is in diverse field, you start learning from it, you become knowledgeable, and the ultimate level is being wise. I'll say a quote which is very relevant, that knowledge is knowing what to say and wisdom is knowing whether to say or not. Now that's a huge difference. I think with time we need to understand, and more so post COVID, an overly degree focused education is not going to be enough. Whether you attained your degree a decade ago, 2 decades ago, or you are still to attain a degree, you need to rethink how you gain the knowledge needed in the time post COVID. Let's talk of Charles Darwin. So his theory of evolution came through his journey on Beagle, when he sailed for 5 years. Gregor John and Mendel, he was a priest, he was a mathematician by training, but his fundamentals of genetics, it came from the research experiments that he did in the monastery's garden. The monastery's garden was a school, was its university. Another genius, probably the polymath we had, and the most versatile genius ever in history, had no formal education. His life was a school where he learned. Probably every one of us have been touched by these people, directly or indirectly. Bill Gates, while in school, his school had a teletype terminal, and he left his classes and learned coding using the teletype terminal. Other students didn't do that. And we know today that he is a tycoon and the biggest philanthropist in the world. Elon Musk, he got admitted in Stanford to pursue a doctorate, and within 2 days he left to start his company. He has given a new direction to space, to electric vehicles, and more fields than these two. I'm sure we'll hear about them in the times to come. Steve Jobs, whether it was Pixar, whether it was Apple, he changed the way we experience, he changed the way we work, he changed the way we think. It is not that these people were not good at studies. I'm not at all trying to convey in any way whatsoever that they abhorred education or were not good, but they realized, like we are realizing now as we pass through COVID, that we have things to change. These three people, in their times, it was not COVID, but they realized that instead of attaining a degree, they may like to transform and change the domains, and they did that. For them, degree wasn't enough, and degree wasn't the path to do what they did. Let's look at two developments that happened last year in October, and this changed our knowledge about the science, the astronomy. The first major development was Jupiter is no more the planet with highest number of moons. It's Saturn. It happened on 7th October 2019. Exactly 2 weeks later, we learned this new word, quantum supremacy, that the new system could compute in less than 4 minutes what the world's most powerful supercomputer would take to do in about 10,000 years. The world is changing with this speed. What could be done in 10,000 years can be done in less than 4 minutes. Sometimes I feel that probably we have done disservice by not teaching our students the Moore's law. Gordon Moore was the co-founder of Intel and chairman emeritus. He coined this Moore's law a good 50 years ago. And what he said was that the power of computing doubles every 2 years. I am just left wondering, had we taught these students, alongside Newton's law, the Archimedes principle, and Einstein's theory, and all that, Moore's law, I'm sure that it would have changed the way people think, the way they imagine, that how can we continue with a curriculum that is 5 or 10 years old, not revised, when that Gordon Moore says the computing speed doubles every 24 months. I think even our educationists probably aren't aware of this. If they aren't aware, 38 years ago, we came to know about Buckminster Fuller's knowledge doubling curve. Now that's a very interesting thing. From 1400 to 1900, the knowledge, or if I were to use a better word, information doubled every 500 years. Then it came down to 100, 50, 20, 10, 8. And as you see this presentation, you hear me, in 2020, information should be doubling every 24 hours, every 12 hours actually. If information is doubling every 12 hours, how relevant is the education system that changes every maybe 3, 5 or 10 years? If you look at this, if you look at the Moore's law, I think a degree certainly is not enough for you. Now, you're bound to think that since information is doubling every 12 hours, and how much can brain cope up with this? So, here is a very interesting research I want to share with you. You know, in London, when taxi drivers applied for a license, they needed to memorize the maps, the locations before they got the license. And the research showed that the drivers, till they were in job, their brains expanded, and when they stopped working, the brain shrank back. So the more you use your brain, the more it adapts to what you're using it for. So I think as knowledge, information doubles every 12 hours, you have phenomenal capacity in your brain, and the more you use, the better this machine is. You know, it is typical of me that you pick up any of my 4 books, and in all of them you will find primary research. I have never tried to thrust my opinions through books. Well, I may have strong opinions, but I put them as recommendations for the future, and thankfully all of them have stood the test of time and been proven right. But for most of the part of what I write in my books is backed by evidence, is backed by data, is backed by facts, and I do primary research. So for this book on education, your degree is not enough, I ran a survey in 113 countries, and interesting findings have come out. I'm going to share some of them, not all of them, because I think there's a limitation of time of what I can talk. So I'm going to share you some bits of that finding. First, that age group of my respondents were predominantly in working age, so almost 90% of them. Even if you look at the level of education, so right from graduate degree to postgraduate to doctorate. So orange is postgraduate and the light blue is doctorate and above. So you see that majority of the people who responded had the highest attainable qualification. These were well educated. So in that sense, I think the right mix of people to give us an opinion of if our education is good enough. And if you look at employment statistics, so you have a decent chunk of people who are professionals, doctors, allied health professionals, engineers, lawyers, educationists, yet people who are employed full-time or part-time, that is a major chunk of our respondents. And then of course you have students and not employed. So I think even in terms of education by region, employment by region, we have the right mix to ask the question that is very pertinent to you and me. So we asked them, what's the role of education? So surprisingly, less than 50% people believe education had a major role to play. And trust me, these are people who are highly educated. These are people who are employed or professionals majorly. So there could be a positive bias in favor of education. But the other numbers are equally enlightening. 33% people say education played a role but not a major role. That is 1/3 of my respondents. close to one-fifth, that is 16.24 people, said other factors besides education played a major role. So if you club both these, 48 49%, actually 49.5% people say that education had not got a major role to play. It was other factors as well. The most important question that I was wanting to ask them is, our education system preparing the children for the future? A very clear, a very definite, and a very emphatic response: no. More than 75% of the respondents who are well educated, are professionals, are doing full-time, part-time jobs, believe that the education system does not prepare the students for the future. And if you look at this response from a regional perspective, so even sometimes there's a sense of doubt, like, oh, this only applies to the third world. Educated people in the first world or the developed markets like the US, Canada, UK, European Union wouldn't say this. Sorry. Look at the numbers and the answers. So from US and Canada, 76% say it does not prepare. UK, 67% say education system does not prepare the children for the future. European Union, 77%. And then China is an outlier, but mind you, they've invested substantially in education, science, and R&D. Africa, 68%, and rest of the world, 77%. So I think it's a very clear call to action, more than the moment of truth. And a question that can unsettle you for a while: what matters, degree or experience? So initially I wanted to put just two choices, degree and experience, but then I thought, no, I should give a third option as well, both. You will see that only degree was considered important by less than 1%, 0.64%. Experience around 23%, and the rest said both are equally important. But the point is, your degree of what you're doing is not enough. Now comes to something that you may not have heard. It's called VUCA. It was a term coined by the American War College in the past century. It means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. It was more for the military warfare strategy, but in today's world, it applies to each one of us. All of us are facing a VUCA world. All of us are fighting a battle for survival. A battle not for our lives, but livelihoods. So this is very important for us. And if you look at the next research that I did in the course of my writing the book, 90% of the jobs that exist today will either get modified or not exist in the next decade. If you are a student of today, 65% of you would be doing jobs that don't exist today. Now that should come as a shock or a surprise, but that's my research. That's a fact, and that is a prediction for you to get prepared for what's in store for you. Now I have some predictions which were done pre-COVID. So these predictions and projections have changed in one parameter for me, that they have become much closer to us. In fact, I would prepone now some of them. Nothing else changes for them. A survey of 500 business leaders in Asia Pacific, they said in response to a survey that impact of technology will be felt by 2023. Well, it may not be that far now. It probably could be much earlier. According to World Economic Forum, 85% of the respondent companies are going to accelerate the adoption of technology by 2021. I guess they have already started doing it thanks to COVID. A very important message going forward, there will be a significant reorientation of roles between man and the machine. So, you as a student, you as a professional are not competing just with other professionals, you're going to compete with the machines. That's the level of perfection and planning you will have to look at. Now, these are some data sets I want you to look at. Let me clear it that all that I am stating in my presentation here, in my talk, is detailed out in my book along with explanations. However, because this is like a video talk, so I have a limitation of time, so I will only touch some important points. So if you look at technology by proportion of companies likely to adopt them by 2022, this was projected in 2018. So you see big data analytics, 85% of the companies will adopt. Aerial and underwater robots, the lowest is 19, but you see more than half of them are talking upwards of 50% in terms of adoption of technologies. So machine learning is 73%, Internet of Things is 75%, app and web enabled market 75%. So there's a huge shifts towards technology dominated opportunities. This is very important, and those who are in these roles right now and those who are planning to get into these roles should look at them really carefully. There will be certain roles in senior management that will remain stable, same in technical, same in education, in engineering and risk advisory, of course logistics and supply chain. There will be new roles that will be coming as an offshoot of adoption of technology or will be driven by technology, and there will be redundancy of roles and a whole lot of them. So the earlier, mind, maybe a decade, 2 decades back, parents would say, do a graduate degree. Maybe you'll find the role of a clerk, data entry operator, or any such similar roles. Sorry, that those kind of roles will become redundant. So while technology will be kind of complementing some of the roles, but eventually over time my belief is that they will be displacing more roles, so in effect technology will be doing those jobs. If you look at the effects on the workforce of the current growth strategy by proportion of companies, so here it is: expanded workforce due to automation 28%. You can look at entire thing right up to the value chain, where reduced current workforce due to automation would be 50. Modified composition of the value chain will be 59. In fact, some of the companies will shift their productions because of the efficiencies in production. I'll give you example in the later slides. This is the skills which are probably in today, when we say 2018, 19 or 20, trending 2022, I'll prepone them to 2021 or 2020, and the declining. So very clearly we are talking of higher levels of creativity in complexity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and designing. So that's where the crux of future lies. Look at how technology is changing the outlook of companies. When it comes to the question of hiring new permanent staff with skills relevant to new technology, it is 84 plus another 12% saying equally likely we may hire. So in effect it's 96%. So look to automate work, 95%. Retain existing employees, Again, 95%. So, come down to the last, strategic redundancies of staff who lack the skills to use new technologies. You have it, 77%. So, whether you want to be on the top 96 or the bottom 77, it will all depend on the skills you acquire. So, even if you're a professional or a mid level employee in an organization or a student, continuous upskilling is the key to be relevant to the needs of time. That's the message. Now, this is a very interesting slide for you to look at. How the mix of man and machine is evolving. So, what is 47% in 2018 is increasing to for 62%. These are the roles that machines will do increasingly more. So, reasoning and decision making, which is 19% machine, it will become 28%. So, increasingly, we will see that machines will have a more dominant role going forward. So, this slide sums up that 54% of people need upskilling, reskilling, whatever we may try to call it or term it. I also looked at the needs of a large developing country like India, about what's the average duration that an Indian should look at spending in upskilling. So, on an average 3 months, but if it's year, you are far more competitive for your domain. And so it is not an option for you to think about whether I should or not. It's a question of what you should upskill yourself for. And these are 3 examples of what all this automation is doing to the future of jobs, like Adidas establishing speed factories for shoe production, which means eliminating 1,000 jobs in Vietnam, which probably happened because of cheap labor incentives. Dutch multinational company Philips shifted production from China back to the Netherlands. Automation, efficiency. Now, this is interesting for those who are looking at thinking that if I am a lawyer, if I am a doctor, if I am an engineer, I should be safe. So here is a glaring example for you to note. Sberbank in Russian Federation has actually replaced 3,000 human employees by robot lawyers. They make the decisions and they will reduce by 98% next year. So a profession like lawyers, which is based on many more skills than routine, is also getting automated. So you have to become hyper competitive. This is a very interesting example when we say that it is the creativity and reasoning that will keep you competitive, probably of the highest level then, because novel writing is an exceptionally creative domain. But a first level of a competition in Japan was won by an AI-backed novel. So you can imagine where we are headed. You will have to be creative enough to stay relevant to your employer. Now, this is a very interesting example where almost 2 weeks ago, the US FDA approved gaming for treating attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. I've known Bakul for many years. He heads the digital health at the US FDA, and he has been driving digital health to a new high. He is redefining what digital technologies will do to healthcare. As we see this, I'm reminded of what I wrote in 2018 in a book. So 2 years ago, WHO classified gaming as a disorder in ICD codes, in ICD 11 to be precise. And now gaming is being used to treat disorders. Now that's the speed of transformation. So closing your eyes because you have a degree is not going to be helping you. Open up to new possibilities. Hope is not a strategy. If you're looking at hope being a strategy, that okay, my degree will be helpful, I'm reading enough, it will be helpful, absolutely not. Everything you can touch, you have to transform. That's what this generation is about. Take a sector, you got to transform it. This is one area which I'm mentioning now. I develop as sections in my book, and I have discussed in detail of how you utilize these three things I'm talking to you. Earlier it was said that if you have a high intelligence quotient, the world is yours. But the latest science says that IQ is only responsible for perhaps 15 to 20% of your entire achievement or success. It is actually emotional quotient which is a big contributor. So if you are an average IQ person with a high emotional quotient, you will do very well in life. And I have given examples in my book about it. But what I inferred finally, and I mentioned in the book, you would need a new IQ. And what's that new IQ? The imagination quotient. If you can imagine the problems of the future, if you can imagine the solutions that will solve them, you are invaluable. So your future USP would be having a high imagination quotient. How do you get there? It's something you have to work. And a degree will not give you an imagination quotient. I have tried to address this issue in my book, and I'm going to touch upon some of the aspects in this talk. So the first thing to develop an imagination quotient or to be innovative is don't copy. Don't copy this presentation and make it somewhere. It doesn't help. That's not innovation. That's not a new thinking. We are very good at doing that, copying something and presenting it by tweaking it. If you have to be innovative, you have to think new, you have to think exponential. The two abilities that you would need: curiosity, to learn more and more, the inquisitiveness, to know things, understand them, and of course, the ability to ask right questions. If you have this ability, you will realize that right questions are more important than right answers. Find your stress buster. With so much of things happening, you need a stress buster. Find an inner calling. Find a purpose. Make it a passion. Turn it into a profession. That's what you need to do. Now, let me stop for 30 seconds on this slide. We are living in a hyper-connected world. The average spend time on social media is more than 2 hours, but just for the sake of calculation, I put it 2 hours. 2 hours into 365 days is 730 hours. If you divide by 24, which is the number of hours in a day, probably you're spending 1 month a year on social media. If you're spending 4 hours on social media per day, you're spending a good 2 months a year on social media. Figure out what you want to do with this time and with social media. So now I'm coming to specific recommendations on what next for you. The first thing, start reading. Start reading diverse, start reading deep. If you are in automobile sector, read healthcare, read education, read agriculture, read a different domain. Learn coding. Coding changes the way you think. Start early, maybe 12 years. As soon as you can start coding. Learn a new language. Learn a new instrument. The activities I've mentioned here, plus there are more, as you dwell in the book. The brain is agile enough to expand the horizons of thinking. And so you need to keep the brain engaged. Do activities that enhance the output from the brain. And these 4 activities are definitely important. My parting message to you is education is not just for those studying formally in schools, colleges, and universities. In fact, everyone is a student of the future, and those who refuse to accept this fact, the future will refuse to accept them. So start learning now to be accepted by the future. And I hope that you will take this message seriously, because what you have been taught as degrees, whether it is Ivy League schools, universities, or the pioneering institutes in the best of the world, it will certainly not be enough. We need to go beyond that, and the world is changing faster than ever before. I hope this helps you in your journey to be relevant to the times, to make a difference, and to make this world a better place. Thank you very much. Wish you good luck.